fibers, and maybe you've heard a little bit about this before. Have you ever heard of somebody before being referred to as a slow twitch person versus a fast twitch type exerciser? And usually people associate your slow twitch people with endurance type exercise, and fast twitch type people, those are your sprinters, very strong type exercisers. A lot of times those are your fast twitch people. And it is true, there are different types of muscle fibers that are better suited to different demands that we put on our muscles. And different people, you know, we're all a little bit different genetically, and some of us are a little more inclined to slow twitch type exercises, and some of us are a little more inclined to fast twitch type exercises. So in reality, muscle fibers fall into three classes, and they're called slow oxidative fibers, or SO fibers would be an abbreviation. I can get my little pen to write here. Fast oxidative, or FO, would be an abbreviation for that, and then fast glycolytic. And then notice these colors over here, red, and white, and notice those terms oxidative, and glycolytic. All right, so oxidative is referring to aerobic cellular respiration. All right, that's what oxidative is referring to. So the fibers that are classified as slow oxidative or fast oxidative tend to produce their ATP that you need for muscle contraction through aerobic cellular respiration. That's how they're making their ATP. Your fast glycolytic fibers, on the other hand, they're very good at using glycolysis to make their ATP. All right, and glycolysis is fast. If you remember when we went over the energy requirements for muscle contraction, glycolysis is that first phase of cellular respiration. It's fast, but you don't get very much ATP. You know, for every glucose molecule a muscle fiber is breaking down. So therefore, you can't rely, a muscle fiber is not going to get by on glycolysis for very long. So ultimately, these slow oxidative fibers, yeah, they crank out lots of ATP for you, but that's kind of a, you know, when you're thinking along the time clock of a cell, of course this would really be happening in a fraction of a second, but nevertheless, aerobic cellular respiration is a longer, more involved process, even though you get more ATP for your buck. So these slow oxidative fibers generate their ATP through that more complex, slower process, and they're slower to contract, but on the other hand, they have lots of ATP fuel around. You get lots of ATP from that, and so they're going to be able to function for a longer period of time. Your fast glycolytic fibers, on the other hand, they're very fast at cranking out ATP. They do glycolysis, they're fast at doing contractions, but they can't work for a long period of time. They tend to run out ATP, they get exhausted pretty quickly. And then your fast oxidative fibers, on the other hand, are in between. All right, and then what do we mean by this red versus white stuff? What is that referring to? Your red fibers have a better blood supply, and they also have more of a protein called myoglobin, and that is a protein that stores O2, and it has a red color. It is related to the hemoglobin in your red blood cells, and hemoglobin takes on a red color when it binds oxygen gas to transport that through your bloodstream to all of your tissues. Your muscle fibers have a protein called myoglobin that's related to hemoglobin, and it binds, it hangs on to oxygen gas and keeps it inside the muscle fibers, prevents it from diffusing away. O2 can diffuse across the cell membrane pretty easily. So myoglobin captures that and stores it so that your muscle fibers have it around to use. What do you need O2 for? You need it for aerobic cellular respiration, that last chemical reaction in the electron transport chain. All right, so your red fibers, and they literally do have a redder color, those are going to be the muscle fibers that have more of this myoglobin in it and a better blood supply. They're storing O2 because they're going to use it for aerobic cellular respiration. Notice that your fast glycolytic fibers, they tend to have a whitish color, okay? And that's because they lack myoglobin, or they have lower levels of it. They're not storing oxygen gas. Your fast glycolytic fibers don't do a lot of aerobic cellular respiration, so they don't need oxygen gas as much. Now they're going to need some because they are going to do cellular respiration to keep themselves functioning and alive, but as far as supplying ATP for your muscle contractions, they don't need to hang on to extra O2. They're not doing any extra cellular respiration like your other muscle fibers have to do to help you out with muscle contraction. All right, this is a table from your textbook, and it's just showing you some characteristics of these different muscle fiber types. So speed of contraction, for example, your slow fibers are slower to contract, now slower down on the molecule time scale. So, I mean, you guys know all of your muscle fibers are contracting in the blink of an eye, but slow versus fast down on this type of time scale that we're thinking about. Your fast fibers contract more quickly. And notice too, myosin ATPase activity. So your myosin heads have to split ATP. Remember that ATP gets split to ADP and phosphate, and that releases energy that's used to cock the myosin heads, almost like you're cocking a trigger. That's energizing them so that they can do their power stroke that we've learned about. So the enzyme that actually does that splitting in the myosin heads is called myosin ATPase. And so the main reason for speed of contraction being different, or one of the main reasons, is that enzyme is slower in your slow oxidative fibers, and it's faster in your fast oxidative and your fast glycolytic fibers. Myoglobin content, again, in your slow oxidative and fast oxidative, it's high. Fast glycolytic, it's low. Glycogen stores, remember glycogen is a storage depot. It's a polysaccharide that's built by linking glucoses together. Glucoses are sources of energy. And notice that your fast glycolytic fibers tend to have higher levels of glycogen around than the other two types. The fast oxidative ones are kind of in between. And the reason for that is they need lots of glucose. Your fast fibers need glucose because for every glucose molecule they break down, they're only getting 2 ATP. So they're going to have to break down more glucose to supply their ATP needs. Notice your recruitment order here, recruitment by the brain. Which muscle fibers is the brain going to recruit for contraction? And the slow oxidative fibers are first, fast oxidative fibers are second, and your fast glycolytic fibers over here are third. That makes sense. I mean, think about it like if you were running a sprint, you're going to start off, you don't immediately start off at the highest intensity that you can sustain, you build up. And so that building up, you're actually seeing your brain or experiencing your brain recruiting those different types of fibers. Or like when you lift a really heavy weight, you're going to have to use your fast glycolytic fibers to make that happen, but you don't just immediately pull some massive heavy weight off of the floor. There's a little bit of a delay while you first grab that thing and you're able to start lifting it. So, and again, you're seeing evidence of this stepwise recruitment of these different kinds of fibers to help you achieve that activity. Rate of fatigue, how fast do they tire out? Your slow oxidatives are slow. The fast oxidatives are kind of in the middle. And your fast glycolytic fibers are going to fatigue the fastest. Fatigue is due to using up ATP. That's what causes fatigue. All right. And let's think about it just for a minute. Well, hang on. Let me go on over to the next slide over here. We'll come back to the thought I was having. This is a little diagram from your textbook which is showing you different things that influence contractile velocity, how fast you can do contractions in muscle fibers, versus contractile duration. How long can you keep contracting a muscle fiber? How long can you keep doing that actin and myosin cross bridging? And all right, notice over here dominance of fast glycolytic fatigable fibers being used. Yes, they're fast, but notice they're not really, you don't see an arrow from here on the contractile duration side, because those fibers don't work for a long period of time. They wear out pretty quickly. Then over here on this side, if you've got lots of slow oxidative, those are fatigue resistant fibers, that's going to help you out with duration. They don't help you out with velocity and speed of contraction as much. And then kind of here in the middle, you know, if you're dealing with a small load, like this person here who's picking up an ice cream cone, smaller the load, which this is just kind of common sense, the smaller the load, the faster you're going to be able to contract your muscles to handle that load, like the ice cream cone over there, versus a 50-pound dumbbell. Contractile duration, you're going to be able to hold an ice cream cone in your hand for a super long period of time. You're not going to fatigue your muscle fibers nearly as quickly as if you were picking up something that's heavier. So that just makes sense. This is a cross section, a slice through a skeletal muscle, and what this is actually showing you, so you're seeing a cross section here. So you've got a sliced through muscle fiber there, there's one there, and there's one here. All right, and notice your slow oxidative fiber there has the darkest color. That's the reddest of the fibers. And again, that's mainly because that muscle fiber has a lot of myoglobin in it. Myoglobin is a reddish colored protein that binds oxygen gas. Then your fast glycolytic fibers, those are your white fibers, don't have a lot of myoglobin, don't bind a lot of oxygen gas, don't need to do any extracellular respiration for muscle contraction. So they have a whitish color to them. And then the fast oxidatives are in between, so they have kind of a light pink color. Because again, their functions are kind of in between the other two. So they have some myoglobin, but not nearly as much as those SO or slow oxidative type fibers. You've seen evidence for fast versus slow fibers when you eat chicken, for example. Like chicken breasts have an abundance of what type of meat in them? Yeah, white fibers. Now think about ducks. If you've ever had a duck breast before, a duck breast is mostly dark meat. Well, guess what? Dark meat has an abundance of these red fibers, those slow oxidative fibers. And that's what gives it the darker color. So if you think about a duck, it's going to use its breast muscles to help flap its wings for flying. Ducks can fly for a long period of time, so they're going to use slow oxidative muscle fibers to make that happen. But if you think about like a chicken or a turkey, they've been bred to have these large breast meat, because that's what we like to eat. But when's the last time you saw a chicken or a turkey flying through the sky for long periods of time? Their breast muscles are full of white fibers, fast glycolytic fibers. So yes, they can flap their wings, yes, they can contract those muscles, but they can't do it for a sustained long period of time. All right, effects of exercise. Aerobic type exercise, endurance exercises, so running, bicycling, that type of thing for long periods of time. What that does, your muscles respond to exercise. And if you engage in those types of exercises, the muscles you're going to use, you're going to have more capillaries that infiltrate the muscle. Those capillaries wiggle their way through the connective tissues in the muscle, the endomysium. Remember the connective tissue coverings you have around each of your muscle fibers. So you'll actually increase those. You know why? Because they're bringing things like oxygen gas and glucose to help fuel all that cellular respiration. Mitochondria, so your muscle fibers will produce more mitochondria. They make their own organelles that have important functions. What do your mitochondria do? Those are your sites of aerobic cellular respiration. So that makes sense. Myoglobin synthesis, your muscle fibers can actually make even more of it the more aerobic type exercise you do. That type of exercise, of course, it helps increase your endurance. It does increase your strength as well, and helps you. The more you do it, the slower your muscles are gonna wind up fatiguing. Your muscle fibers can actually change types to some degree. Your fast glycolytic fibers can convert into fast oxidative fibers, so they can go from being the sprinter type to kind of being in between the sprinter and the endurance exercise type. So the more endurance type exercise you do, your body's going to adapt. Now resistance type exercise, like if you get involved in weightlifting, you're lifting heavy weights, sprinting, things like that, this will result in what we call muscle hypertrophy. What does hypertrophy mean? Hypertrophy means increase in size. So you can also have hypertrophy of osseous tissues in the bone, like where you have those little processes and tuberosities and tubercles. Those are places where the tendons of muscles are pulling on your bones. That stimulates bone synthesis, so that can be considered bone hypertrophy as well. Hypertrophy is an increase in size when your muscles get bigger due to exercise. It's not really so much that you're making more skeletal muscle fibers, you're not making more cells. What happens is individual fibers get wider. Okay, the myofibrils, where you have your thin and thick filaments, they thicken and they widen. That's what's really going on with muscle hypertrophy when you increase the size of your muscles. So it's not that you're really producing more muscle fiber cells, you still have about the same amount, most likely. Some of these things are still not all that completely well understood, but most likely you're not really increasing your muscle fiber number. It's just that the fibers that you have are making more actin and myosin and tropomyosin and troponin, and so all those myofibrils in there are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and so that makes the cells themselves larger. Your muscle fibers will also make more mitochondria. Myofibrils get bigger, you store more glycogen because glycogen gets broken down to release glucose, which you can use for glycolysis and cellular respiration as well. Even your connective tissues, like your ligaments and your tendons, those are going to increase in size as well. So your body's very good at adapting to the demands that we put on it. And if you're engaging in strength exercise, it's not that you only increase your fast glycolytic fibers, the white fibers. You use all of these different kinds of fibers for exercise. You're going to have multiple adaptations. It's just that weight training is going to tend to adapt you better to that type of exercise. Aerobic type exercise, running and bicycling, is going to adapt you more to endurance and sustaining contractions more so than increasing their power. All right, this whole idea that we can get our muscles to adapt to the demands that we put on them, that's called the overload principle. And some of this we already know. Obviously, this dude over here has taken this way to the extreme. Wouldn't be surprised if he's taking some supplements as well. Testosterone, male hormones, and their derivatives tend to promote muscle overgrowth, lots of muscle hypertrophy. Also hypertrophy of the skeletal system as well. You'll have an increase in size of increase in thickness of bones. Remember, your bones, after your growth plates close, you only have that appositional type growth, the widening type growth, rather than the lengthening type growth. All right, so forcing a muscle to work hard promotes increased muscle strength and endurance, like we were just talking about. Your muscles adapt to the demands that you put on them. And once your muscles have adapt, and you've probably experienced this before if you've ever exercised, if you've ever trained with weights, eventually your muscles adapt to whatever loads you're lifting, and if you want to keep getting stronger, you've got to use more and more and more weight to make that happen. So your muscles need to continue to be overloaded to produce further gains. And what happens if you stop exercising? What is the opposite of hypertrophy? The opposite is called atrophy. So that is a decrease in size. So tissues across, any type of tissue could atrophy, but muscle atrophy is referring to a decrease in the size of your muscles. So your muscle fibers, all those thin and thick filaments they've got filling up most of the space, if you don't use your muscles and they don't need as many of those thin and thick filaments, they'll actually break them down. They wear out and have to be replaced anyway, but as they wind up breaking down and needing to be recycled, you won't rebuild them. You won't keep making lots and lots of thin and thick filaments in your muscle fibers if you're not actually using your muscle fibers to do work. And that's why you've seen people who are confined to wheelchairs and their legs, the muscle tissues in their legs just atrophy from underuse, and they become very, very, very thin. Also, as you get older, your muscle tissues tend to atrophy as well. And a great part of that is just due to the reduced use of those tissues as you get older. All right, so that's the end of this particular lecture. The last lecture we're going to have for Chapter 9 here for Unit 4 will be a little bit more about some effects of aging on the muscular system, and we'll talk about a few muscular disorders, including muscular dystrophy, and that will finish up the Unit 4 physiology.